Welcome to our channel. We hope you enjoy today's video. Enjoy watching.
My husband left me pregnant on the side of the road in a snowstorm to rush to his former lover, Veronica Ramirez. Calmly, I scheduled an abortion for the next day and decided to start loving myself from then on. However, when my husband found out, he pushed Veronica away and begged me for forgiveness with tears in his eyes. Today was supposed to be the day my husband, Javier, would take me to the hospital for a pregnancy checkup. But halfway there, Veronica called him, saying her son had a high fever. Without explaining anything to me, he told me to get out of the car and drove to Veronica's house, which was in the opposite direction. He left me stranded on a deserted road, and the intense snowstorm had turned everything into a frozen disaster. I slipped and fell, and the pain shot through my stomach like hundreds of needles piercing me at once. A kind stranger found me and took me to the hospital, where I was relieved to hear that my baby was fine after the checkup. I kept calling Javier, hoping he would come to pick me up, but he never answered. His phone went straight to voicemail or showed a busy signal, but whenever Veronica called, he responded immediately. This reminded me of how things used to be before we got married. His phone was always on, and he would always answer my calls. I went home with a heavy heart and simply collapsed. Javier returned around 1 a.m., muttering to himself as he entered the house. He complained that I had already gone to bed and didn't even leave a light on for him. I used to wait up for him no matter how late he came home, and if I fell asleep, I would leave the nightlight on. But tonight, I just didn't have the energy to care. I turned my back on him, leaving his questions hanging in the air. Javier explained that Veronica's son had a fever of 39 degrees, and that if he hadn't taken him to the hospital, it could have led to brain damage. He expected me to show some compassion, but I retorted, asking if he had thought about me at all when he left me on the side of the road in the middle of a snowstorm. I asked if he cared whether I made it to the hospital or not, considering I was pregnant with our baby. I pointed out that Veronica could have called 911 herself and didn't need my husband to solve her problems. Javier let out a long, exasperated sigh, looking at me as if I was losing control. He told me not to be so mean, explaining that Veronica had just returned from England, where her British husband had divorced her, and she had no one else to turn to. As Javier spoke, I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I asked him why he didn't just divorce me and go be with Veronica if that's what he truly wanted. The more we talked, the more my heart ached. I remembered the days before we got married, when Javier would put me first in everything. If I had a simple cold, he would become frantic, taking me to the hospital and ignoring urgent calls from his boss. But now, he seemed like a stranger, indifferent and distant. Perhaps he saw the sadness in my face, because he softened his expression, drew closer, and wrapped his arms around me. He apologized and promised it wouldn't happen again, trying to calm me down. However, when his hand slid under my neck and his lips brushed against my skin, I pushed him away, asking what he meant by saying it had been a while since we last made love, considering we had done it just the month before. The doctor had warned us to avoid sex until the baby was born, or I could lose it. Javier murmured, visibly frustrated, and let me go. He grabbed his phone, and what he saw made his face light up completely. His eyes became soft and gentle, and he seemed completely absorbed. I called his name, but he didn't respond, as if he hadn't even heard me. While he was in the shower, I took his phone from the nightstand, and to my surprise, he had changed the lock screen password. It used to be my birthday, but after several failed attempts, I tried 23-11, and it worked. November 23rd was the day his precious Veronica Ramirez returned from England after her divorce. I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh as I unlocked Javier's phone and saw his message history. Veronica's words were full of sweetness, and her constant calls to my husband were driving me crazy. Javier's messages revealed that he was playing the role of a father to Veronica's son, Tony. My heart sank, and my body felt numb. I could still remember the promises he made on our wedding night, to love me forever, to be loyal, and to only have eyes for me. It had only been 3 years, and those promises had already rusted. Javier got out of the shower and saw me with his phone, and his face twisted with fury. He pushed me so hard that I fell to the ground, and the pain shot through my stomach. I had to grit my teeth to bear it. I couldn't sleep that night, and Javier's words kept echoing in my head like a tape that wouldn't stop playing. Every image of him, Veronica, and that child who dared to call him dad made me feel like something inside me was crumbling. It wasn't just anger, it was a mix of betrayal, sadness, and frustration that burned my chest. It was as if I had suddenly realized that everything I thought was my life was a lie, and the worst part was that he didn't seem to care how much he was hurting me. That night, I didn't sleep, but it was then that I made a decision: I wouldn't stay silent. The next morning, with my mind still cloudy but with a renewed clarity in my heart, I got up early and searched for every piece of evidence I could find. I reviewed his phone, the call history, and the messages he had deleted. I knew he wouldn't take long to wake up, and I wanted to be ready for whatever was to come. When he finally came down to the kitchen, his surprised expression was all I needed to confirm my suspicions. He looked at me with a mix of disdain and curiosity, as if I was crazy for checking his phone. But at that moment, I didn't care what he thought, I just wanted answers. I looked him straight in the eye and told him, my voice trembling with rage, that I knew everything, that I had heard the voice message from his little Tony and read every word Veronica had sent him. Javier's reaction was worthy of a bad soap opera actor. He first denied everything, as if I was an idiot who had misinterpreted things. "Clara, it's not what you think," he said, trying to sound calm, but his tone only repulsed me now. I saw him squirming, trying to find some lie to wriggle out of, but there was no going back this time. I wasn't going to swallow his lies again. Every time he tried to justify himself, it was like the ground was opening up beneath his feet. I let him talk, listening to every word he said with a cynicism that made my skin crawl. "How could you, Javier?" I asked him finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "How could you look me in the eye, swear eternal love, and at the same time play happy family with another woman?" I saw him looking at me, his eyes shifting from surprise to guilt and then to contempt. It was in that instant that I realized he didn't feel remorse, he was just angry at being caught. With every word he said, my heart hardened. I had to be strong, not sad, because he had lost someone who truly loved him. However, I wasn't going to come out of this situation as a victim. I had other plans for Javier. I took a deep breath, as if everything I was about to do was just a simple formality, and told him I wanted a divorce. His face changed immediately, a mix of surprise and fear, as if he suddenly understood that he had lost all control over me. He couldn't bear the idea of losing me, not because he loved me, but because he was going to lose the power he thought he had over me. He tried to change his tone, soften his words, almost begging me to think it over. "Clara, we can't do something so drastic," he said, trying to take my hands, but it was too late for empty promises. I pulled my hands away and responded with a calmness I didn't know I had. "Javier, this time there's no going back. I've seen enough to understand that I can't trust you." After that moment, everything was a whirlwind. I didn't give him time to react. I told him I had already contacted a lawyer and was prepared to fight for every cent that was mine. His face went from anger to desperation in seconds. For him, money had always been a tool of control, a way to keep me comfortable and dependent, but now all that was slipping out of his hands. "You don't have to do this, Clara," he tried to say, his voice trembling with fear, but his plea didn't move me at all. All I felt was a bitter satisfaction, like a relief after years of enduring his lies. As he tried to recompose himself, I felt a strange sense of peace, as if I had finally broken the chains that bound me to him. I explained, almost as if I was dictating a lesson, that this divorce wasn't about money or blind revenge, it was about dignity. I made it clear that I didn't care what he thought, that everything was over, and that I was going to fight to recover what was mine, including my peace. The word divorce resonated in the room, and for the first time, I felt like I had control. I wasn't going to stop until each of my rights was secured, and he knew what he had lost. As I watched him crumble, I couldn't help but remember how he used to be attentive, caring, and willing to do anything to see me smile. That Javier no longer existed. In his place, I had a bitter, trapped man, caught in his own lies. Ironically, that gave me even more strength. From that moment on, everything changed. I focused all my energy on achieving my freedom. Each day was a small battle won, a step closer to my independence and my mental peace. I decided that I wasn't going to let him or his broken promises continue to poison my life. I started taking control of every aspect of my life that he had managed for his own convenience. First, I opened a bank account in my name only. Then, I hired a lawyer to help me prepare for the divorce. Each decision was a reminder that I was capable of taking care of myself. Javier tried to apologize, leaving me messages and showing up at my work, but I kept my distance. I knew that each of those attempts wasn't about love or genuine regret, but about someone who simply couldn't bear to lose. And that, to be honest, made me feel like I was finally winning. Finally, the day of the divorce hearing arrived. Javier looked at me with a lost expression, wearing the same jacket he always used to make a good impression. As he tried to approach me, I stopped him with a firm look. There was nothing more to discuss. As we walked towards the courtroom, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety, as if I was closing a door behind me and leaving all that pain on the other side. Inside the courtroom, Javier tried to appeal to the judge's pity, telling half-truths and manipulating details. But I was prepared. My lawyer had gathered every piece of evidence that showed his lies, his constant messages to Veronica, and even the financial transactions he had made to her. Seeing his face change as each of his secrets was exposed was the culmination of all my effort. There he was, the man I once thought I loved, reduced to someone without morals, someone who would now pay the consequences of his actions. There was no need for shouting or violent revenge, the truth was the strongest blow. After the hearing, I left the courthouse with a peace I had never felt before. Each step I took moved me further away from Javier and everything he had represented. It was as if, for the first time in years, I could breathe without feeling like I was carrying an invisible weight on my chest. Deep down, I knew that my life was changing in a way I never could have imagined. But that gave me strength. When I arrived home, I looked around and realized that every corner had some memory of him. But this time, I didn't feel nostalgic. With an unrelenting determination, I started to begin anew, without his shadow. The following days were a whirlwind of changes. I started redecorating the apartment, getting rid of everything that reminded me of him. I changed the furniture, the pictures, even the color of the walls. Everything had to be a reflection of my new life, a life in which I was the protagonist, not someone relegated to a secondary role. The transformation of my environment was also an internal transformation. Each day, as I woke up, I felt like I was moving further away from the person I had been with him and closer to the woman I had always wanted to be. One day, while organizing the divorce papers and reviewing some legal documents, I found something that caught my attention. Javier had left several pending accounts and debts in my name, probably thinking that I would never check those details. But this time, I was one step ahead. I decided to investigate each of those transactions and discovered that he had been using my name to obtain tax benefits, securing properties, and making suspicious transfers. It was an unexpected blow, but it gave me an idea that would become the final piece of my revenge. Instead of getting angry or lamenting, I used all that information and contacted his financial advisor, pretending that I wanted to solve the debts together. With a smile that hid my true intentions, I handed everything over to my lawyer, making sure that each of Javier's shady moves was reported. It was like watching a trap close in on him, a trap that he himself had set. Now, his financial problems wouldn't just come to light, but they would also cost him much more than he imagined. I knew that I would soon receive a call, and when it came, I would be ready to listen to his desperation. It didn't take long before the phone rang. It was Javier, desperate, stuttering between pleas and threats, trying to understand how his little trap had turned against him. Listening to his voice on the verge of collapse was like sweet revenge. Each word he spoke only confirmed that he had lost all control. He tried to convince me, calling me love, and using the same sweet words that had once made me give in. But this time, I didn't fall for it. I just listened in silence, letting him drown in his own excuses. And when he finished, I responded with the same calmness that he used to use when he lied to me. Javier, there's nothing more to talk about. The law will take care of you. The following days were a slow-motion display of his downfall. His accounts were frozen, he lost properties, and rumors about his deceit began to circulate among our acquaintances. Veronica, who had thought she could stay with a rich and generous Javier, disappeared as soon as she found out that the money was gone. In the end, he had no one. Everything he had built on lies and manipulations came crashing down like a house of cards. And although I didn't rejoice in anyone's suffering, in this case, I felt that it was well-deserved justice. Finally, when everything was over, I found myself reflecting on how I had gotten to that point, years of believing in empty words and promises that were never fulfilled. But I no longer felt like the same person. That version of me, the one who thought her value depended on someone else, was left behind. Now, I was the owner of my own story, and the life that awaited me was full of possibilities. I allowed myself a moment of peace, looking forward and thinking about everything I could still achieve. Javier had been just a chapter, a dark chapter that taught me to love myself more than I ever thought I could. The last time I heard about Javier was through a mutual friend, who told me that he had had to move, without a job, without money, and worst of all, without the pristine image he had always defended. But that information didn't affect me. On the contrary, it was the perfect closure for a story that no longer belonged to me. Now, time and destiny would take care of him. I, on the other hand, moved forward, knowing that I had earned the peace I had been seeking. This was the end of a cycle and the beginning of a new life, one in which I no longer had to look back. I finished the story with a smile, knowing that my revenge had been complete, and that I was finally free.